go red. And once it's gone red, there we go. Right, so today in a slightly impromptu stream, I am with Chapingro. I hope I've just said your name right there, your username. And we're going to talk a little bit about education and our different perspectives on the way education operates and how we can help and aid schools in the educating of children, what is affecting them, what is happening with them, and talk about politics and education. So firstly, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful, and just to aid the conversation, it's Chapingro, like
Chapingro.
Chappie and Pingro. Chapingro.
Chapingro. Fantastic.
Yes, sir.
See, the interesting thing of not hearing a word said out loud, you always pronounce it very
Exactly.
gently. But no, it's great to be talking with you, Chapingro. Um, so I think I should let you have the floor and open the conversation out. If you were met with the question, how would you help schools uh, improve their educational functions today? What would be the way you would go about this? What would be your place in taking schools forward and taking the education system forward on the whole?
Unfortunately, spur of the moment, I'm going to throw myself under the bus here straight up and say I don't have the definite prescription of what we ought do. I've noticed a few things that we've tried over and over again to marginal success. So I might be taking more of a what should we not do position than a what we should be doing position, if that's okay.
That's fine. That is sort. Knowing what not to do can help us work out what to do. So go for it. What would you not do? What would be your don'ts for helping education?
I think the biggest critical error that we tend to run into over and over and over again is that we make some statement like, well, wouldn't more resources help the problem? And this is kind of a default truth. There's almost never a case in the world where more resources wouldn't help in some way, but it skips over the idea of diminishing returns and asks for the next dollar, how much more will we get? And I think we're, at least in the US, far beyond the point where adding another dollar is getting anywhere near a dollar's worth of gains.
Okay, so I mean, I think that there's an interesting point there about how we fund, how the resources and money we have go into schools and education and such. And certainly, I can sort of see the idea that just throwing a lump sum at a school, just saying to like the head teacher or the administrative board, here's a check from the government, fix the school, and that translating to the school being better. That's not necessarily going to fly, but I think there is actually a case for some form of that being very helpful for a lot of schools in not just the US, but the UK. I think the context of the last few decades in both our countries and others is one of austerity, one of defunding of state schools, where the actual funds and resources that the schools get are not equivalent to what the school needs to be able to support the varying children that enter its facilities. And whether or not the funds the school gets are allocated properly is dwarfed by the actual lack of resources that the schools still have in comparison to what they need. And certainly when you think about the way that issues have arisen over the last few years, or gained more prominence rather. So in terms of neurodivergence, in terms of the actual population entering the schools, the size and scope of classrooms, the way that the curriculum changes, there are so many things which schools could do more effectively if they were actually given the resources that teachers and teaching assistants and the infrastructure around the school critically needs to function, which could be improved if they were given some funds to actually, or more funds in the sense of what they need to be able to go, take themselves forward and address the needs of the population they have.
Again, I see what you're saying is like kind of a default truth in the world. But in this particular case, I feel like we've pushed that button a number of times, and the success rate just, in my opinion, doesn't really come up to snuff. So I, we're clearly disagreeing, the question would be something like, what would it take for each one of us to convince the other of our positions? And I think the concern is that we're going to get lost in the weeds in so many different directions when we have to recognize that this is kind of a holistic problem. But at the level of a holistic problem, how do we put data to that?
Okay. I would actually disagree slightly with the idea that it is holistic necessarily. I think that it is to an extent a default truth that if you give people more, they have the capacity to do more. But I don't think the button has been pressed enough whatsoever. I think that actually there's a lot of schools across the Western world and certainly beyond that that have never seen the funds to adequately realize their vision for what they're aiming for. Certainly, the inner city schools, which have the greater need in terms of undiagnosed, like ADHD, for instance, kids who come in packed full of issues that have arisen through their experience of the social world and never receive anything close to what would be a suitable support frame from their school surroundings, and then end up with you said earlier about success rate. Well, some kids don't get the chance to succeed because their schools don't have the tools to do it. So I would disagree with the idea that the button's been pressed lots of times. I'd say it's quite the opposite, actually.
What I'm not hearing from you is anything about parental responsibility in terms of the outcomes of the students. Like, I'm half expecting you to jump in and tell me, well, there are so many parents who just don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they're working 3 jobs, they can't help their child succeed in school. But I want us to be fair and say we wouldn't want a 13-year-old behind the wheel of a car on a highway, right?
Yeah.
And part of that, what I'm pointing toward, is that the onus of responsibility shouldn't be on the child for their schooling success. So there's only 2 places where this onus of responsibility can go: either the parents or the government and the education system. I feel like we've leaned really heavily at least during my lifetime, and I'm getting close to 40, into the government needs to fix it, the government needs to fix it. And more, it seems to just give parents an excuse to say, well, that's not my problem, it's the government's problem.
Okay. So I think that it's interesting when we talk about parental responsibility, because absolutely parents, as the people at the center of a child's life, certainly before they reach education, but throughout their childhood as well, reach formal education, um, of course they have responsibility, and of course they need to make sure they're doing what they can to help their child. Um, and yes, I think that whilst it is important to look at the social world, look at the, as you say, people who don't have the time necessarily find it hard to support their children. Of course, there needs to be some, putting things to them to say, well, actually, you've got to do a bit more here and such. But I think that doesn't change the fact that ultimately the schools still need to have the resources to be able to help the child, regardless of how they've entered the school setting. Because there's plenty of kids who aren't having their needs met, who have parents that would, try and do the best they can and such, but just don't have that educational expertise. But on top of that, I think that if you want to look at how the parents can help and how we can help the parents feel in a better place to be able to support their children, the same problems arise. Like, of course, we want parents to be able to support the education of children and their well-being and health and such. But the environment in which that is made easier is one that funds the things that people interact with. So a library that lets kids go and have a look at books and such, and lets parents lets their parents support the educational needs of the kids outside of the school before they even reach the school. Um, Housing and food, which obviously is something that some of us take for granted. A lot of kids won't have a stable access to food and housing, which affects the way that their upbringing is going to start. And then again, they enter the school in a place that these things aren't secure. In the school itself, being able to take your homework home and build on your education at school in the home setting is something that isn't going to be the case for everyone. If you've got a home in which, like we just said, the parent is out having to work, or the parent isn't in a place where they're able to offer that educational support to the kid, be it helping with homework, be it just providing a quiet space in the home to be able to sit and read your book or do your maths or whatever, that's going to be really tricky for that kid going out of that environment into the school one, which is going to have a lot of stuff going on for it. And so ultimately, the pieces we can put in place to help support parents who are having a tricky time are part of the same framework that says, we need to support the funding of these places and institutions, the schools, the ability to help parents in tricky situations, because ultimately parents who have the trickier time of helping the kids also need that support and need that help and teamwork from educational authorities and professionals and such. For that to be in place, you need the resources and you need the funding and the time to be able to construct the best frameworks and help the kids, who are ultimately the priority, right? Making sure the next generation has the best start they can to engage in the world. So I think that I think that my perspective definitely incorporates parental responsibility, and funding the schools would facilitate a better way for the parents to be, and guardians and such, to be involved in the kid's life.
You're giving me the tautology again, and trying to. I'm sorry.
Can I ask how it's a tautology?
We agreed to this earlier, that having more resources is identically linked with the ability to accomplish more.
But then that's, yeah. So yeah, of course, more resources makes it easier and better and such. But
okay, but the question I'm not hearing being spoken to on your end is the notion that I brought up of diminishing returns. Namely, if I give you an extra $1, maybe the first $1 I give you, I get $1.10 worth of returns. But by the time I've given you the 500th extra $1, maybe we're only getting 50 cents worth of returns on that $1, and less for each successive.
yeah, just quickly, someone in Geek in the chat, friend of the channel, of course, says my microphone's a bit low. Am I sounding okay to you, Chapingro? Is my volume?
I have my volume all the way up, and
Okay, maybe I do need to turn.
You're maybe 75% of what I would expect from full volume, but I can hear you just fine.
How does it sound now, Geek? Does it sound any better?
It's like 5% louder. I'm not having troubles. I would ask your chat.
My heavily populated chat in this moment in time.
Well, luckily, those few people are really there to help you and be there while you stream. So they're usually the best.
Exactly. Right. It sounds better. Fantastic. You can hear me. Okay. So diminishing returns.
Please.
I think that firstly, even if I think there's an educational principle and value to having effort and resources put into education, which should be independent of the results of the children's education. Like if we've got the need, i.e., lots of children with neurodivergence and the need for support and such, and parents who are having a tricky time supporting, like it shouldn't matter that potentially they won't all turn out to be straight A students. It should be, okay, we've got to help little Tim because we've got to, he deserves to have that help. He's a child, he needs support, so we've got to support him. But I would say that the factors that make the dollar, it's used your hypothetical, if you're putting in this dollar each time, like the economic factors around that are what should be interrogated if that dollar can't go the same way. Because you're quite right, a dollar that was spent in 1980 is not going to spend, 1985 is not going to spend the same way in 2025. But there are factors beyond that which I think need to be interrogated there. So I mentioned austerity a second ago. The things which help a family bring the child to school in the best possible way. So a family that has supported their reading before they've come to school and given them toys which support, which help them develop cognitively and give them the leisure time to go to the park and run around, and they're able to have some autonomy for, you know, as much as you can at that age, like they're not still in nappies and stuff. Those things to have happen need to be in homes which are able to afford a healthy diet, able to dedicate enough time to go to the park and play, you know, age appropriate sports and stuff. All of that needs to be considered economically, and to look at the economy, you've got to look at the fact that resources have been taken out of the areas where we're seeing more need at schools. So urban state projects and welfare state and public resources have been defunded in the same way schools have, meaning the children that get to the school and are rife with social problems and find it really tricky to be in that learning environment, they've also not had the funding put in elsewhere in their life, making it harder for their families, which leads to lots of kids being in a tricky situation. So I think we've got to look at it, you know, as a whole package, and not just a diminishing return in terms of the kid has not succeeded, which is also, I think, a little bit. It's a separate question actually, but well, yeah, I'll let you respond to that.
You said a lot there. There's a million things I want to chew on, but the most immediate thing that's glaring at me is, earlier I said that it would be a holistic problem and that would make it difficult for us to convince each other which way to go. You pushed back. You said it's not holistic. Now you're saying let's be holistic again.
In the sense that the funding isn't holistic. It's just the case that they've not received the resources and funding they've needed. Like, austerity is something which has been an open policy of Western governments for quite some time. But in terms of the kids, of course, it's holistic in the sense that it's, you know, every child's different. Every child's going to have a unique background. What needs to be analysed in a more, the objective part is that the schools haven't got the budget of a school isn't enough to support all the need. So like a classroom, let's say, of 30 kids has loads of stuff going on, and then like one teacher, maybe if you're lucky, a teaching assistant, said teaching assistant and teacher haven't got the capacity to be able to support the need of all these kids, many of whom need potentially real one-to-one support, many of whom could benefit from mental health support, you know, more awareness of their neurodivergence. There's loads going on, and the resources which would help, which definitely would make a difference in those child's lives, can't be put into place because the school doesn't have the money. You know, you get teachers that have to spend their own part of their own salary buying even just like pens and glue sticks and stuff. So how are they going to have the time to, say, sit with a dyslexic kid and put in the framework to make it easier to digest written information and such? Or dyscalculia, even. I can't say it properly. You know, the kids who find it hard to interpret and understand numbers and the presentation of maths as we would probably find quite intuitive. That takes time to resolve for a child. But if you don't have the extra staff to support it, that teacher is either spread very thinly or just unable to support a kid who needs the help. That's what we're saying when we're saying it's not, there's an element of this which isn't holistic, in the sense that objectively the school hasn't got the money to support that.
Okay. I mean, there's some ad absurdum we could go down here, right? And I'm trying not to take us off in wild tangents, but can we at least agree that at some level, if you've thrown enough dollars and you're not getting returns, throwing more dollars is not always the answer?
In that hypothetical, yes, but we haven't thrown enough dollars. That's sort of what I'm saying. Like, it's not as though we're in a situation where education professionals have just been given everything they've wanted for, you know, decades and decades and not got anything. They've always had to fight against the shrinking resources versus the massively expanding need. Especially when you also add in the element of managerialism and things which external forces judging the schools and then deciding whether they get more funding based on the performance, which itself is, yeah, a questionable measure to be as like an objective thing to tell a school whether or not they're good or not. You know, I don't think it is the case that you know, the hypothetical you just suggested, I don't think is necessarily accurate there.
I'm not asking if you think that's where we are. I'm saying, can we agree that there is some limit?
Well, yes, in the sense that like we'd. No, I don't think anyone's saying right. This head teacher is now emperor and can choose whatever money, whatever value they want to give their school. Of course not. It would
All
be
right.
in an ideal system, we'd have a more democratic system of managing education. But I don't think the thing you're asking me to agree on is necessarily connected to, or necessarily close to where schools are right now, if that makes sense.
I can agree that you don't agree. And you said anecdotes are good, and I tend to try to stay away from anecdotes, but I do have some personal experience being that person in front of 30 kids. And while there's an idealistic part of me that wants to agree with everything you're saying, I think there's a pragmatism that's being severely overlooked. One of the biggest things I can point to that I think will just be at odds on is when you're a teacher in front of 30, 32, 35 students, it is not possible to offer all of the prerequisite care models with in the States we have something called IEP. Are you familiar with that?
Enlighten me. Go on.
I'm sure you're familiar. They're basically it's like an individualized education package, which so people who have all of the extra needs that you're talking about are supposed to get special care.
Okay, we have equivalent in the UK. Yeah.
When 25 out of your 35 students have an IEP, it is not possible to cover all of those bounds, like to meet all of the requirements that we're being asked to meet. It would not be possible unless we got down to a situation where we have like 5 students per classroom. So the place I think that you and I are going to severely disagree on is when I'm up in front of my very poor rural, they weren't minority, but very poor white population. I have to make the best of what I can with what I've got. So if I have a few people that are trying, that are clearly showing me, even if they're struggling to succeed, if they're showing me that effort, then that's the best place that I can invest my efforts as a teacher. And my student reports at the end of the year, when it came to state testing, showed that it was not just good for the people that were showing effort.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great that you're able to support the kids who are able to try and work through that adversity. And there's definitely loads of situations like that in the US and UK where you got kids really trying to battle against the quite bad odds they've been given. Certainly in I can imagine US is quite a big country. You've got loads of, I said inner city schools earlier. You're quite right. There's loads of schools in rural parts of the country, or more rural parts of the country, that just don't get not no school funding, but like transport, internet, loads of issues of that. Absolutely. But that is sort of what I'm saying, right? Like your job would have been easier in that situation, presumably, if you had other educational professionals in the classroom that could. I mean, 25 out of 32 is quite a lot, but there's definitely a way that can be managed better, right? Or managed in a way that is more conducive to supporting them if you had the extra staff. And I think as well, because you're
Well,
quite
hang on.
right.
Before you jump ahead, let me
Go on, you
speak
go
to
ahead.
that. You are correct that there are ways that it could be managed better, and I think the biggest way that we could manage this better is, as I stated in the beginning, the onus of responsibility can either come down to the government or it can be put back on the parents. And the one thing that we're not trying, with few exceptions, like I'd like to discuss the Mississippi thing, if possible. There seems to be no urgency whatsoever for the parents to claim responsibility for the outcomes of their children? I'm not hearing it from you.
Because I don't think that it's as black and white as the parent is 100%. Like if if your kid has shown up and they're not getting good grades, you've got to look at that parent. Like there's a world of social factors for one, and secondly, it's not as though we're in a society where everyone has the equal footing to be able to support their kid, and the actions of the parent are solely the pure influence on what that kid is going to end up like through school. There's a world of interacting factors and features which influence how that kid goes through it. And I think to place everything on another, on one or two human beings, especially when they too are in the same boat and in the same situation, is silly. I think if we're trying to support parents to help their kids more, which is obviously the point.
Why is it silly?
Why is what silly?
Why would it be silly to move back to a system? And again, I'd like to discuss the Mississippi thing if you're aware of it.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a little bit. Yeah.
Why is it silly when parental involvement is the best indicator? Throw everything else out the window. If you have parental involvement, student outcomes are higher.
Yeah. So to help
Okay.
parents get involved.
So if we have all of these dials we can turn to get better outcomes, and one of these dials does more than any of the others, shouldn't we turn that dial first?
The dial you're wanting to turn is dependent on the same, like I said earlier, the same economic and social factors which are part of the austerity problem. Like a parent that doesn't support their kid, if we analyze why that is, like it's not like they're some, I don't know, Trunchbull, Cruella de Vil evil character. They're a human being that have been influenced by factors and who are being contorted in society by various social pulls and pushes and such. And that's what we've got to analyze to be able to address the wider problem of lack of involvement. Like,
can we agree that there's such a thing as a banality of evil?
In what sense?
In the sense that not all evil is directly malicious. Some evil is just going along to get along.
In the sense that, people like, you're sort of saying like that there's some which is built into society. Is that what you're sort of saying here?
Yes. In my low-end school that I was working at, I did not get parental involvement until like 2 days before the report card was going to come out. And that's because, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, sir. I cut you off.
The pattern I saw was parents coming in and saying, why is my student failing? And I would ask, how many days of this last grading period have you asked your student to teach you what they did in class today? And their response is never. That's your job. That's not my job. And being in the position of a teacher, I have to walk a very tight rope where I can't be as honest with parents as I would like to. I could not then follow up with, what part is your job? And that would be kind of my question to you. What part is the parent's job?
I mean,
because practically speaking,
yourself, right? Go ahead, sorry, you haven't finished.
I'm feel free to talk over me, please.
I was just going to say that I agree with what you said, right? Like the parents should be involved in, the kid should bring home stuff and say, I learned this today. And the parents should be getting involved in what's being said and reading with them, doing the maths with them, just engage in the process of education. Because it's not, you're quite right. The school day is only a few hours of the day. There's so much time, which the kid is also hopefully pursuing their academic and educational studies and interest in the world. But it's not as though the parent is intentionally trying to harm the child's well-being and outcomes.
I agree. Neglect is rarely intentional.
Exactly. So then we've got to look at why that is. And a lot of
but it's still neglect, right?
It's a form of neglect, yeah, but it's not, I don't think it's quite the same as, when I hear the word neglect, I'm of course there's many different forms, right? It's not as though it's all just the most harrowing example.
Let's go as far as you'd want to go. I had parents, or rather I had students who came to school hungry every day because their parents neglected to feed them.
Absolutely, and that's an example of more severe neglect than what I was thinking of a second ago, which is, you know, maybe a parent that's ambivalent and disinterested in the child's
All right,
reading and such, right?
I
But
can't give you numbers for this, but the vast majority of parents in our very low end side of the system were negligent parents.
yeah, so negligence as a spectrum from, you know, the not being that interested in helping them read and such, or not putting the time in and such, to the really severe cases of malnutrition and, you know, worse and such, right? Of
At
course.
the
And
very
all of
least,
those,
like 4 weeks out of the year, did they care about the outcomes of their student?
but okay. So I would say that, like, the word care here, and, you know, the verb care, that is going to be expressed in different ways. The parent that only came, you know, like the parents that come in just when it's report time, and they're like, well, why is my student not doing, why is my kid not doing well? Like, it's not that they don't care, it's that their manner of which they're able to support their child is, you know, not good enough at this moment in time, which is what we need to analyze. And then analyzing that is then looking at their life. What has led this parent to not spend the adequate amount of time uh, being interested in their education? And yet, part of that is, you know, the parent needs to put in the effort and put in a shift, because there's absolutely parents who do really try and get their kids engaged in the system that is in front of them. But the factors that influence why some parents aren't are economic. You know, they're parents having to work, parents who have spent time working and therefore are tired. When you're tired, you don't make the best decisions. One of those decisions is maybe sitting on the sofa instead of helping the kid. And yeah, it's not great. It should be that we should be seeing more, but we've got to address that reasoning behind why the parent isn't spending the time to be able to get interested in it more. Another one
Okay,
is
we're
access
at
to,
the right point. No amount of extra funding to the educational system will help with that.
well, it will, because if you fund the school more, for one, the kid is you've probably got less work they're having to catch up on and stuff. But the funding to the school is also rippling throughout the
Wait.
community.
Why would the student have less work? As a matter of fact, and again, this is only anecdotal, just my experience. I could
So
not assign homework because I knew the low interaction rate that I was going to get from my students, which was kind of just the entire school suffered from this. If the parents had been more engaged, the students would have actually had more work and been able to accomplish more in the prescribed time to the school year.
not less work in the sense of officially assigned. I mean, like, less to catch up with to get to the expected standard you'd hope for a child of whatever, you know, relevant age group, right? So kids which can engage in the school activities easier will find the work they take home, of course, still take time, but it's something which is more easily put into a schedule than, say, a dyslexic kid whose parents don't have the means to be and wants to be able to help, who are already behind at school because, as you said a minute ago, there's tons of kids in the class who need the help and they're just not able to get to everyone in time, and then end up with, like, the report that says your child is well behind and can't engage in it more. Like, there's also an element of the parents not being able to do a lot of the help themselves, and that's not just like they're you know they're not
Well, there you go.
like,
You've just explained the difference between wealthy, educated schools and less wealthy schools who have parents with lesser education backgrounds. Yes,
which is
the
influenced by the funding, the resources.
influenced, sure.
Yeah,
Again,
massively.
I'm no, not massively, not at this point.
Like, the wealthier schools are wealthier, um, in part because of where they're situated, right? Like, if you unless you're fortunate, the the areas where have wealthier schools are also wealthier themselves. Like, the inner city schools are not don't have the um, backgrounds which have the wealth, right? So it's harder to maintain the wealth and such. and put it into programs. But then there's also
you
the
keep going
element
back to
of
inner city schools, and correct me
and
if I'm
rural
wrong
schools
here.
as well.
Well, that is the big differentiator in my eyes. Am I wrong to believe that inner city schools tend to get much higher dollar per student per capita student?
Depends, right? Like you get some which you will get more funding because of the greater population. They've got more kids coming in, but that doesn't translate to all
Per
the
capita.
need that.
I'm not saying gross. I'm saying per capita, per student. The dollars allotted per student in a given school year. It's my understanding that in most places, I can't speak to the UK, but in the US, metropolitan areas have much higher dollar per capita allowances.
Necessarily, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's hit and miss, right? Some schools definitely, and some, obviously it's not uniform. Like different states have it different ways, and the same thing in the UK, right? We don't have states, but some local authorities have more resources than others. However, urban areas on the whole don't have the same ability to support their students, and poorer schools don't have the resources to meet.
Okay, so it's not
kids.
that they get less; it's
But they
that
do,
you think they need more relative to their starting point.
The needs that are coming into the schools need more resources to be able to support it. Like your school can get plenty of you can say, oh, there's like hundreds of kids more going to this school, so we're giving more, but it's not equivalent to the need going in, right? Like, and we've got to think as well.
We're talking per student head. I agree with you. Let's not get bogged down in raw numbers, like gross numbers, because metropolitan areas have a higher cost of living. Things are going to be more expensive. There's going to be a larger pool of money there. That aside, what we really care about is how many dollars are dedicated to student A and student B versus in another school district, their student A prime and student B prime.
So what you're saying that so I'm slightly lost there. Like the difference in funding you're saying is irrelevant to the outcome of A prime, B prime.
Yes, and that's why I asked earlier what we could use to convince each other, given that we now both agree it's a very holistic problem. I could give you
elements of it holistic, but it does come back to the material conditions. I don't agree, but it is the bit we're focusing on.
Let's play in the material conditions game. I wouldn't say the majority of my students, but close to half of my students would get they were at the level where they were going up to the office every Friday to get their take-home bag of food for the weekend.
Yeah.
So extremely impoverished area. Now, one of my students, I'm not going to name any names.
Of course.
He did very poorly. He was one of these students that probably in that per capita allotment, he was getting way more than everybody else because his need was so much greater, if you want to phrase it that way. And I remember it struck me as odd because he was always hungry, always wanted food. And then one Monday morning when I was out doing my duty, he came in. Normally he was a really morose kid, very, soft-spoken. And he came into school that Monday morning just excited and ready to tell everybody. So, all right, what's going on? What happened this weekend? Why are you, I'm glad to see you're in a good mood. What's going on? And he goes, my dad got us these 2 mini motorcycles and we wrecked one, but oh man, we had so much fun over the weekend. And so I'm sitting here going, so your dad can't make sure that there's food on the table for the weekends, but he can invest in mini motorcycles. Your dad can't help you with studying for your math homework, but he's going to create a scenario which is vastly more dangerous than sitting in the home and doing homework. And then juxtaposed to him, I had this other young lady and she was very quiet. I only found out through talking to the other teachers that she came from just a really bad home space. I won't go further than that. But she told me at the beginning of the year, she said, I want to get out of this. Can you help me? Because I keep hearing math is important. And I said, yeah. And that girl, having nothing to her name, busted her butt all year. And while she wasn't my best student, she was probably my most improved student. So all of these are extremely impoverished people. We have two exceedingly different outcomes. And I don't think that, while I'm happy that that girl took she took it on herself, as a middle schooler, I don't think that was her job.
Yeah.
I think her guardian or parent, who are ultimately responsible for her outcomes, should have been the one coming to me at the beginning of the school year and saying, I want my, insert relation to do better. How can I do that?
Okay. So I think from those two examples, you demonstrate that quite clearly the way we help children needs to be something which involves more than just the parent or the school. It needs to be a whole community centered thing. And that isn't to say that every single adult must be personally involved in this kid's life, but the systems and structures in their life need to have that nourishment and funding and such to help. Because you're quite right, it sounds horrendous that this kid is hungry and struggling and such, and the dad's off spending money on motorbikes and such. But that shouldn't be your conclusion from that. I think needs as well as to be of course, because I'd be staggered as well, right, if this is something I've witnessed. But it can't just be that's the end of it. It's got to be, okay, this is clearly a neglectful situation. How can we not put the resources into the getting this father some sort of help or something, or helping him work out and manage their resources? Because you've got to remember that someone who acts in that manner likely hasn't also had the education to be able to work out what is impulsive spending and what is more sensible spending, what is going to
Once
help
again,
the kid.
I completely agree. But if you examine the statement that you just made, that is an Occam's razor of why you see such distinctions amongst populaces in terms of school outcomes. The people who are educated, who value education because they came from parents that valued education, are way more likely to have students that do well during their tenure.
But that is influenced by the social world, because so this kid that the kid that had the dad and the bikes, right? When they grow up, and if they potentially have kids, their kids might also have the same tricky situation, right?
I completely agree, but you're trying to solve the problem solely from the supply side.
No, but we've got to look at it through this social, that kid in that situation has been let down by their parents, right?
Yes. So what
in 20 years, if I just
what can we do to incentivize the parents?
In 20 years, though, with this kid, if let's say they have children and their children are raised by someone who learned that impulsive buying is better than structuring education and structuring your money and such, that hasn't come inherently from the kid who's now an adult. That came from their family. It came from the family before that. It's structural. It comes through the lack of resources that's in the community as a whole that would maybe intervene at some point and say, yeah, we've got to put some social worker in to help structure this family's finances, because
if it were just resources, then the girl who busted her butt all year, being the least resources available to her, that should never have happened.
I mean, exactly right. The resources would have also helped that kid, and whilst it's fantastic that she,
but that's where we're talking past each other. I agree with you. It would help. You are seeming to make the claim that it is the solution, and I'm saying it's a poor solution because we're not discussing the main factor here, the biggest dial we could turn, which is parental involvement.
The parental involvement would be improved by resources being elsewhere in this person's life. For instance, at some point, the school, because when you learn that the kid is hungry all the time, presumably there's a mechanism that you would have had to flag up and say, yes, there's a clear safeguarding issue here, right? The kid is hungry all the time in my class. That in a better, well-funded like social system would lead to some form of intervention. You'd say, okay, Mr. Whoever, your kid is hungry. What's going on? And yeah, there may be some resistance, but eventually you'd get to some portrait of this father's life that would make it make you understand why they're reckless of money and doing these things. You'd be able to put in some sort of social worker who's able to help structure the family finances. And critically, you'd have a situation where the kid's not going to school hungry and having to rely on handouts from the school. They'd have something in place. That doesn't happen now because, as with everything else, social workers are extremely under-resourced and have far too many cases for them to handle adequately, leading to people falling through safety nets or having situations just be sustained, as with this kid. And again, of course, parental involvement is important. Of course, it's a massive difference if someone's able to work hard, but
it's the primary factor.
But a lot that is just luck, though, isn't it? Whereas the other one is structured. You can't choose who your parents are. It's just luck.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So we've got to look instead of making a totally supply side argument in which we don't turn in any way the most influential dial, we just say, let's keep spinning all these dials. We'll max them out to 11. There's no incentive package here, carrot or stick, which is encouraging the parents to become more involved. Like, as I agree with you, my motorbike kid, he is likely to repeat the cycle. Even if he won the lottery, it wouldn't break the cycle. As a matter of fact, the rapid influx of money, as we know with the lottery, usually makes things worse.
Yeah.
So it's not just the money.
Of course. But
okay, so I want to hear something else from you besides the money. Not the services, because all of that is just, let's throw money in a different place.
Important money, but go ahead.
I'm not disagreeing with you that at some level it is important. But I'm not hearing you speak to what I'm getting at, which is how do we affect the demand side of the equation? Because I guarantee you, if I took, take whatever cutout, the richest, wealthiest neighborhood you want that has the best schools. I guarantee you that if I put those students in my very low-end school, so long as the parental engagement was still there, they would outstrip everybody else in the school.
So you're saying if you put, like, I don't know, the Rockefeller family into this rural town, their kid, and sent their kid to this school, they'd be top of your class. Is that what you're saying?
To some extent. And I think you might be able to look in the mirror and see something similar. Well, I should ask, did you go to a public school?
State school, yeah. Government funded and such.
Okay. I also went to a public setting, and you sound like you were the kind of guy, honor student.
Yeah, I got grades. Thank
okay.
you for...
Wonderful. Well, I mean, you're giving me good conversation. Call a good thing when I see it. I am absolutely sure that you experienced classes where, like, maybe there wasn't an honors offering or an advanced offering, and you were just in the regular class with everybody else because it's a class you had to take. And in those classes, you looked around yourself and went, oh my God, we're going so slow. Is that a feeling you can empathize with or recognize?
That's an experience that I had.
Okay. You might have been bored, thereby causing worse grades. But can I also assume that your parents actually cared about your education, or were you one of my very rare students?
I'm very lucky. I've got parents that have really put the time into helping me get good grades and such, and read to me and all that sort of such. Yeah. Okay.
In this mediocre class that's going so slow, and you're actually being held back in a way if you think about it, right? Because you're not able to excel at your individual pace, which would be the ideal. If you took a D or an F home, I'm sorry, I don't know how you guys do grades, but if you took a very low grade home to your parents, would they say, oh, well, it's not your fault, it's all of the other students in your class?
No, of course, they would have pushed me to get to work out why I got a lower grade.
They would say, life's not fair. And even though it may not be up to the par of your other classes, it is still you your responsibility. I, the parent, am going to place this responsibility on you as the student to make sure you maintain a standard of excellence. Money's not involved in this equation. Okay. It's parental care.
But behind the direct interaction, there is money. Because like, whilst I certainly didn't come from like super wealthy or anything, I was never hungry, always had a roof over my head. So of course, we've got some money, right? But equally, my parents were working lots. Like, you've got things going on there. So what I'm saying, sorry, my parents had, whilst they were working and such, they had the time to be able to do things with me to facilitate a better, education and such. And they did these things when I was younger, so that it was easier for me to do it by myself as I got older, right? Because like independence is something which is important for kids to learn. As you've just said, you've got to be able to take initiative and put the time in to do that. That isn't the case for everyone. And for a lot of kids in those classes, they either didn't, their parents weren't able to support their learning because they were working more, or they didn't have the extra resilience and such to push through, like working all day and then coming home exhausted and not having the time to be able to sit and analyze why someone got a lower grade. That isn't because they are inherently like failed parents. A lot of that is because of the structures of the stuff around them. And also I think there's another element to it as well, which is that, the kids which are struggling, even if they don't have, no matter what a parental situation is, like the kids still need the support from the network around them. And for that to be realized, for us to facilitate better parenting and better support for lots of children, there needs to be analysis of why they weren't doing it in the first place. And that inevitably comes back to the excessive time spent working, the lack of resources available to them, the fact that it's tiring and hard work to be in the situation of working from 9 till 5 and then coming home and having to instantly engage with your kids' educational stuff. And of course, of course, we want everyone to try and do that because everyone should want the best of their kids. But and most people do. Like I think that's another thing as well. Sorry to keep going. People like it's not as though there's like an abundance of parents who are like, yeah, I don't care what happens to Jill at school. She can just do what she wants. I'm gonna go watch TV. Of course, they want to support them, but people's habits and people's like emotional needs and people's bodily just reactions to being tired and such make it harder. When we're tired, it's harder for us to think logically and act in the best way. And so
I fundamentally reject this lack of responsibility that you seem to be arguing for. It's not there's no responsibility on the home whatsoever, because we can always give some challenging reason or another. And I hope you think I've been good faith enough to recognize those challenges, and I'm not denying that those challenges exist. But the claim you keep coming back to is that the solution is more money. And I think I've laid out a couple of cases here where money is a factor, yes, but it was not the deciding factor.
But to go back to your example of the kid with the motorbikes, right?
Mm-hmm.
To get to a situation where a parent has basically let their kid go hungry whilst they're off impulsively buying some motorbikes, that you need to go back beyond the day they bought the bikes, right? You've got to go back to what has happened in this person's life to get into this situation.
I totally agree. So what should the state do in that situation? Should the state take that student away from that parent because they're clearly neglecting their child's education?
So let's continue our analysis, right? Let's look at this potential person's life. So managing money is a skill. It's something which is takes math skills, a competency of numbers, but also impulse and also the good fortune to be able to have the time to be able to learn how to do these things, right?
I don't know if I can say right. Are you claiming a biological effect that some people are just inherently more capable or not capable?
No, not biological, social. Like impulse control is something that loads of adults struggle with, right? It's not. I don't mean just in terms of like like hitting someone. But actually, no, I do mean that because
I think you're going on the right path. So, like, if I survey a bunch of smokers I happen to be one of them, and say, do you think you should quit? Do you want to quit? Most of us are going to say yes.
Yeah. But whereas
Does
cigarettes
that
contain
correlate as
nicotine.
strongly with our repeated action as to the outcome we get?
Okay, but cigarettes contain nicotine, which is, it makes the cigarettes addictive, right? In this case, the skills haven't been learnt or transmitted as easily, in part because of the lack of resources and the lack of intervention too. Because let's be clear, this parent was once a kid. When they were a kid, they likely had things going on, especially if they're in a situation where, they're this unable to think about what the kid needs. Lack of education is a massive part of why lots of parents are unable to support their kid, even if they've got some money to spend on motorbikes. The resources that would have been able to intervene aren't there. The school
It is a reason. It is not the reason.
But it is when we think about, like, so let's say we're in the school
No, it's
situation,
not.
right?
So
We
have examples.
In the school situation, the intervention which would look at this family and do something about it isn't there, because the social worker hasn't got the resources to be able
What
to
should the school do?
Well, they should communicate with other safeguarding bodies, so healthcare, social worker, and say, let's put something together to meet with this parent and work out what's going on. Because it's not okay for them to be in this situation. But
what authority does the social worker have to make this parent sit down and go over their homework?
So they're working in tandem with other safeguarding authorities, the school, the social worker, maybe a
Give me any
team.
direct line. What do you think I should have done as a teacher? Because I spent countless afternoons, we're salaried, but technically off the clock, calling parents.
I agree.
I'm going to be honest, I don't feel super comfortable, given I don't know what's going on in that household, calling in something like child services, because I'm not a part of that situation.
But
I could make the situation a million times worse.
Yeah. But that's why that's why I said it's a community thing, right? It's a thing that involves different parts of the safeguarding role that society, we have for children as a society. We want to help kids because they are not yet adults. They're still finding their way in society. They need the support and care of the people around them. So, of course, no one's saying that you stride into their home and be like, right, we're going to change things this instant. Of course not. But for the tools to be in place to be able to...
So the thing that we would need to do, you're agreeing we can't do.
Like, under this
that's the issue.
But that's because there's not resources.
What resources would change that?
Well, as you've just said yourself, you had to dip into your own time to put things together. That's the case for loads of people in professional situations because the funding isn't there. If the workload was shared, if you had more staff, if you had the time not worrying about like where your bill's going to be paid and such, to actually put a plan together to help this family, things could be in place. You could meet, and this isn't, I want to stress that I'm not like turning this into, oh, you failed this kid or whatever. Like, of course not. I'm thinking in terms of...
No, please. I would actually rather you do that so that you can give me something concrete that you think I should have done.
But it's not, that's sort of what we're trying to get away from. It's not the responsibility of one person. It should be
the responsibility is with a nebulous entity we call the government, which has no face, no enforcement mechanism. The only thing it can do is try to affect the supply side.
But as you've just said, as you as one teacher, you're responsible for the whole class, you can't by yourself turn things around for this kid. As you've said, the parent is off spending money on a whim on motorbikes and such. In a better society, which would obviously, you know that I'm quite left-wing, obviously there's broader changes happening as well. But at the very least, a society with better funded educational and safeguarding things in place would be able to sit down with this parent and arrange a meeting, work out a strategy, say to this parent, you've spent money on a motorbike when your kid is going to school hungry, you're getting handouts from the school to feed your kid. This is not okay. What's going on? And through that interrogation, because this is not unique to this one kid, like loads of irresponsible money management and unstable family homes, that's a part of lots of family dynamics. That's something that can be addressed and fixed with a social worker who can help the family okay, what makes someone spend money impulsively? How can we help you not spend money impulsively?
You can only help somebody in that situation who is asking for change. A social worker coming in to one of the parents that I had to deal with, which please don't misunderstand. My students were freaking great. I loved my students, as rowdy as they were. There's something about late age middle school that's just a blast. Their parents, however, a social worker could potentially, as a matter of fact, I offered this to the few parents who would actually engage with me. I offered parental tutoring. None of them ever took me up on it. So that was a resource that I'm offering to them out of the goodness of my own heart. It would have directly affected the outcomes of their student. They for whatever reason, and again, you can say it's because they have too many, they're overstressed, they're overworked, they have all the other things. They prioritize different things in their life. This is low on the priority list. And I don't see how a government program can force the kind of societal change which you seem to be pointing toward. Because it can only offer, it can't say you must, at least not in our system.
Okay. So it's very nice that you offered this help. I'm disappointed, obviously, that they didn't take you up on it. However, the fact that parents didn't take you up on this help isn't, I think, like 100%.
It's indicative. I agree.
But then,
it's an indicator. It is of the few things we can latch onto.
What you're saying it does, doesn't it?
I'm trying to get to something concrete. And let's
look at that. Like, let's say you're a parent who works all day, right? And you have only a certain amount of time at the end of the day, and you're exhausted from work. And then teacher says, right, come into this time, come into the school at this time, and we'll sit and do another class where we're gonna, help you do this stuff. Whilst of course you are trying to help. So some that might be perceived as too much to do another thing on their schedule. There's also an element of I think it's tricky for people sometimes to accept help, especially in the culture we've both grown up in, where it's very individualistic. It's very much you got to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. It's tricky for people to actually say, yeah, I want help, especially as an adult, because when you're a kid, you're in school, like, of course there's a natural teacher-student dichotomy. It's hard, and that doesn't make it right, but it's hard for lots of adults to say, yeah, I want to be educated again. I want to have that help, which is why it has to be mediated through professionals who can help make it easier for adults to get support.
Well, hang on, I was the professional. How is it any different? How is the social worker going to teach the parent for all of the same reasons you just listed out? Like, apply exactly the same lens that you just said. The social worker said, I can help you better your finances. I can help you better understand how to manage your finances. In the exact same way that I said, I can help you better understand what your child is doing by essentially tutoring grown adults.
The social worker spends more time familiarizing himself with the family unit, whereas teachers spend more time with, you spend more time with kids, right? So there's that element of it. There's still, social workers also meet this resistance. No one's
Can we agree that there's always going to be some additional reason?
But no, I wouldn't agree with that. It's tricky.
Oh, great. Let's stick in there. Where is the point at which I can say it's the parent's fault?
Well, fault.
How many resources should be available such that we can say we've done everything reasonable? Because I don't want to get to the point where we're becoming unreasonable. As a matter of fact, I think we've crossed that threshold, but you disagree. That's fine. When is it too far?
Well, we should never give up, should we? Like, we're not computers. There's no fail state, is there? It's not like it's a video game where it's like, well, you've crossed this line, kids just a worthless cause now. Like, no, we should always try. But
for all the reasons you just pointed out, once they become an adult, there is a failure state.
No, but even the adult can be helped. It's trickier. Of course it's trickier when we're an adult, because like I just said, there's societal
things. The adult can help themselves. That's the differentiation we make between the adult and the child. We help the child. We offer resources for the adult to help themselves.
No, but the adults also, I'm saying adult like an American. The adults also
Is that better?
No, you were fine. It was I chat to so many Americans, but I end up copying some of the words. The adults, like, so let's say this kid with, I keep going back to a motorbike kid, right? That kid likely grows up into someone who has a hard time managing finances. They need, like, they're still in need of help. We all still can learn, even as we grow
I
older, right?
agree. And no matter how
So
much pestering by, and they did have a social, that kid in particular did have a social worker to their family.
yeah, and that social worker probably had other people they're having to look after as well, right? And having to engage
And
with.
if I engaged with that social worker, they would tell me, hey, look, I know finances are important, but you got to understand there are so many other things going wrong at an even more fundamental level with this family.
Yes, which tie back into things that we could have intervened with earlier had there been the funding for such programs. Like, so,
I mean,
what would be,
at some point, it sounds like you would prefer we just incarcerate the parent until they become like they meet some threshold of value to society.
well, no, I don't think chucking a parent in prison is. No, I'm not in favor of that at all. I'm thinking in terms of intervening before we get to a point where, you know, where this kid is in a negligently raised household, right? Like the sister, like, so you said there's other things which don't just point to money, and of course, but when we analyze what would have made it better, it ultimately does come back to some form of education or support which would need the funding to take place. Give you an example, lots of parents really don't know how to look after like young children, right? Like a baby, and they don't understand what nutritional differences there are between various age groups, why you can't just give your kid slop. You need to sort of actually support their development in one of the fastest growing parts of their life. That comes through education, through putting the resources and time into educational facilities, and that can be for kids and for adults, to learn about the body and about nutritional health, which loads of people don't. That's also why lots and lots of people, don't like. We often talk about, why are poor people so fat? Why are they obese? Well, it's because nutritional health is something which needs to be learned. You can't just like know it intuitively. It's something that needs to be understood. And if you don't understand that, it's easy to see why a lot of people find it hard to give themselves the adequate diet to not gain weight or not, be deficient in vitamins and such, right?
I mean, I think we're just at the point where we're both just reiterating our positions.
I mean, I think there's still, because there was something you said earlier, which I didn't get round to. I'm trying to find some of these scribbles on it. Like, I just, I'm a little bit, because you're in this situation where you said yourself, right? You've got so much need in your class, and it sounds like this kid also was had that need too. Because if you're coming to school hungry every day, there's a lot of stuff which is going to be harder for you, right? Like it's hard to learn algebra, say, if your stomach is rumbling every minute, right? So that should be, if there were more resources put into the life of the school and also the sort of life things around you, so the structures in society around where the school was, things would be much easier, right? Things would be much easier for the kids coming in. Maybe there'd be less need if the kids had a more stable, well-funded pathway towards, if they got the same resources that the richer schools got, things would be easier. No one's saying perfect. No one's saying every kid's going to be straight A perfect, perfect Peter-esque child.
Okay, then dig in there. How much is good enough?
How much is good enough? Well, I mean,
let's say that we got to the point, and we'll be realistic about the world. We can't fix these things overnight. No matter how much extra services that we provide, these aren't surefire kinds of things. We still have to hope that the parent decides that they want to better themselves and engage, and thus it will be passed on to the children, et cetera, et cetera. So if we get to the point where, say, the vast majority of wealthy school districts are getting like averaging high B's or A's, and the lower districts are averaging mid C's to low B's. Is that enough, or are you going to say, oh no, that's still not equitable?
Well, I mean, I feel like, we've got even with the grades, like it's always tricky because I think that to some extent,
Yeah, they're inflated,
like,
and depending on which district, you get different kinds of grading patterns. I'm
yeah,
trying to
I
give
mean,
us something that we can dig our teeth into instead of,
okay,
because if I can be completely honest with you, and I
yeah,
don't want to be crass, but it sounds like you're just throwing platitudes at me, and I'm saying yes, in an idealistic sense, I mostly agree with what you're saying, but the realities on the ground are such that we can say these things all day long until we change the core of the problem, which is that parental decision to become involved. I think we're just spinning in circles.
I mean, obviously we have differing opinions, but that, I don't disagree that parental help and such is, I agree that parents are an important part, and guardians and such, which is why I want resources put in there, because they haven't been. But to go back to what you were saying about, like getting schools to a higher level and such, and what would be an acceptable level. If you've got a school which has like thousands running it, it's got sports programs, it's got sports facilities, it's got access to high level equipment, state of the art computers and such. We would want similar things in schools that have never seen that. Schools where the internet has only recently been put in and it's patchy and not working properly. Schools like, from the sounds of it, your one, where you've got like kids basically where everyone has additional needs, and the teacher and whatever teaching assistant is available, because in some it's none, right? There's actual staffing there to support that, so you can do intervention groups and stuff. And then that, because our analysis has to be one which looks at the whole structure, and one that has to, it has any merit, look at society as a whole, because school's not isolated. As you've just said, parents are an important factor. They live in a society beyond that of the school. That also needs addressing. So looking at,
How? Give me some idea.
Okay, well, we've got to look at why public resources are so inaccessible for so many, and a lot of that comes back to
I need an
academic content.
incentive package from you. I need
An
to
incentive
know
package.
what is incentivizing these parents, because currently, the more we give, the less incentive they have to engage. And as a matter of fact, I don't even think this is necessarily wealth related. There's a lot of learned helplessness at the higher end schools, which a bunch of my fellow teachers jumped ship to get their gig at the rich school in the county. But they ended up saying essentially the same things. All of my parents are complaining about new math because it's not the math that they learned. And because of that, they don't want to engage. And then they wonder why their child is struggling.
I mean, well, just quickly, if they jump ship to go to the richer school, that is also, I mean, we've all got our own incentives, right? But the effect then on the poorer school is that staff are leaving, and it's hard to replace them.
I worded
right?
that poorly. I don't mean it to sound like they're bad people.
Oh,
They were
no, of
just
course they're not.
like, they were
they've got their
trying
own
to
needs.
get a better career for themselves,
Of
and
course,
that was their
and
path to do it. So.
there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that they are the fault here. I'm saying that is also an effect which that is also why we're saying resources need to be in, because the poorer school can't keep the staff which would help them, maintain their, help the kids more, right? If you have pull factors from other schools and you've got push factors from the school in question, said school's going to have a hard time. But to answer your question, of course, it's not as though like rich schools are like paradises where everyone enters a child and leaves an Einstein, right? Of course not. But the difference is there's a higher chance that in those schools there's more resources for a kid to get the help that they might need, because people are neurodivergent everywhere in society. There's no such thing. It's not as though like only poor people have dyslexia or whatever. But in a school with more staff and more professionally trained people and with better networks, you can identify the kid which has dyslexia and put in something in place that can help them improve their cogency with literacy. The poorer school doesn't have that. So putting a program like that in place, which is just a case of saying, yes, we're going to with the resources we have in society, allocate more to the school and to the other things around it. That would make it better. That would make it more equitable and therefore produce a fairer education system. And broadly, of course, I would say, I mean, it's
Platonically speaking, I agree with you.
I mean, here is essentially where the long-term, the sort of wider aim lens of criticism is, and the sort of capitalist structures and such. But in terms of the short term, very easily you could give schools more funding to do things, and they would be able to hire more staff and support the needs of their kids more. And that's something as easy as just, not cutting off the tap straight away, being able to say, yeah, we're not gonna, we're gonna not send the administrators around if you spend too much on glue sticks this year, right?
I'm stuck, bud. I mean, our conversation is not heated at each other, but we seem to be at a fundamental impasse.
But what do you fundamentally disagree with, though? Because, like you said yourself, like the teachers left you, like people were leaving your school to go to a nicer, richer, whatever school. Like, if that school had the funding to be able to keep some of the staff, it would be in a better place. If it had the funding to, you said yourself, a class of 32 where 25 had additional needs. Like, were you in the class? Like, did you have a teaching assistant when you, or like a support worker or something in the class with you?
Marginally, it was a person that was split amongst we called them pods.
Yeah, but exactly, they had to split their time. So if you were able to say, okay, we're going to hire someone else, and then we'll put one of you in this class and one of you in the other, just that alone would make it easier, right? Because you've got another pair of eyes.
No, say, because then there's more I need to manage.
No, but like obviously this person is like has some experience being in a school, but you've got two people that are doing, sorry, one person is split between two classes, so there's a harder time for that person to support either class. If you hired a second person, Mr. Smith can go in one class, Mr. Johnson in the other class. All of a sudden, there's now one more adult in either room, right? And you could expand that for more and more if you had the resources. No?
Platonically, I'm agreeing with you. Yes, if we lived in our utopia where resources were not an issue, yes.
But it doesn't have to be utopian, because, like,
it is. It's somewhat utopian. Like, you're the doctor pointing at the bleeding wound and saying, well, it's bad that this person has this open wound that's he's bleeding out from, and I'm saying, yes, I agree, that's bad. But as the person looking at it in the holistic manner, I'm saying the problem here was the knife that caused the wound, or rather the person wielding the knife that caused the wound. So if you want me to agree that more money generally better, it would be ridiculous of me not to agree. But where we're missing each other is I don't see a cap on your more money stance. It just seems to be, well, if there's a problem, more money.
Right. Let's use that as an example, right? So the doctor has seen this person with their wound, right? And yeah, you're quite right. We go back a few steps and we see that they've got like the knife has stabbed them. How did the knife get into their body would be what we'd ask next. And inevitably, you would perform some sort of analysis and even like just a crime scene investigation to work out how it happened. So the same thing should be applied to the parents that are not able to support their kids, and inevitably it comes down to
yes. And I've been trying to point to that and said, money aside, the wound is there. I agree. The dial that matters here is the choice of the parent to engage. And then you went on to say, oh, but this is a generational thing. Yes, I totally agree. But then we get back to all of the resource methods that we currently have in our system. And I don't know if I would want to live in a different system because it would be much more authoritarian. But the only resources methods that we have right now are to offer help. If that parent doesn't choose to take the help, there's no change. It's just another generation.
Yeah, but you're talking about right now without the resources that would help, right? Like, because you can make referrals and such, right? As a teacher, you are able to say, I need to notify this body, this agency to come in and do something, but there's a big backlog, there's a big queue, right?
You
There's a
seem
big
really
need
adverse to pushing toward parental responsibility, and I think we're going to always miss each other at
right,
that level.
Okay. So Raptor in the chat asks, how are schools funded? Which is sort of what we're hinting at. Like, the school that has more resources has the catchment area to draw from a broader pool of funding. Exists in the district, which is able to spend more on its education. The schools that we've talked about, spoken about with the issues, for the kids, don't have those luxuries, don't have those resources. And
I
so
agree. The wound is bleeding. You're right. The wound is bleeding. But then we would have to ask, why do we see such differences across these wealth sectors? Well, generally what you see is the parents in those more wealthy areas, regardless of how much funding is coming to the school, are doing their part to ensure their child's success. So instead of me as a teacher having to go out and pay for extra pencils and extra paper so that my students have the tools that they need to be prepared and ready for class, in the wealthier districts, you almost never see that.
Yeah, because they have more resources, because the parents it's
because they care.
more likely,
because they care. Resources aside, it's the care.
Able to. You can't ignore the resources though, because who's anyone to say, oh, they don't care? It's resources.
You can't say you can't ignore X. Now, maybe I'm just thinking too much like a mathematician, but if somebody provides me a theorem and then somebody else provides a single counterexample to that theorem is false. We have many counterexamples where the money was not the deciding factor. The resources were not the deciding factor.
It's massively indicative.
Massively influential, yes, but not the deciding factor. Correlation and causation
it's not just a correlation, though, is it? It's like if your parents have more resources, they can spend more time with you, they can give you more in your life to work with, they can take
again, let me run my very dystopian experiment where I take all of the children from this wealthy neighborhood, put them in a much less funded school, and I guarantee you, even though there will be a dip, I'm not denying, on some level the resources matter. But the dip that you see in those students' outcomes will not in any way match the difference in school funding.
If you move these kids across to the poorer school, are they keeping are their families still wealthy? Like, are they still?
Yeah. All things the same.
Of course, they're gonna have an easier time.
Okay. So it's not about the money that the school is getting. Rather, it's about the resources that the parents are willing to prioritize toward their education.
But the students which were able to benefit in that situation had the wealth there. The school, they're still having a less effective education because they're still going into classrooms with, as you said earlier, not enough adults there to support them. And in many cases, you're going to see kids struggle in a tricky environment just because of the chaotic nature of the environment. But the fact still remains, the wealthy parents have the advantage. They have the advantage over the poorer ones because they don't have to spend as much time working, performing like household tasks, thinking about where the next paycheck's coming from, money, food and such. Like, also,
that's also, I think that's a giant misnomer. As a matter of fact, one of the things that you find with great amounts of wealth is that wealthy people tend to overly care about their income.
But not in the same way that, firstly, I wouldn't quite agree. But secondly, not in the sense that they're having to think, what am I going to do if there's no money?
You're exactly right. It's not the same way because one is high time preference and one is low time preference. The low time preference will get the better outcomes, regardless of resources.
Sorry, could you explain low time preference?
I don't remember where this idea originates from, but you have high time preferences and low time preferences. Basically, what you're doing is you're valuing how much you're willing to put off the reward. So if I'm high time preference, I care about having a good time right now. I care about living every moment of my life to its fullest in this moment. If I'm low time preference, I'm probably going to do something like go to the gym, because even though it sucks while I'm there, I'm looking forward to the benefits that I'm going to get down the road that I can't see or benefit from right now.
Okay, but if you are a person with less resources, if you're poorer, your way you
High
manage your
time
time,
preference, just like my motorbike kid.
the way
High time
you're
preference.
managing your
Dad got a
time,
little bump of money, and instead of putting that towards something that's going to get his children good outcomes, we live it up in the moment this weekend.
the way you manage your time is affected by the resources you have. That person obviously didn't use their money wisely, but that is influenced by the way they were unable to use their time earlier. The fact they didn't learn how to manage their money is influenced by that. And also, that is, I don't think, representative of a majority of poor people who still want the best of their kids, but just don't have the time. You know, they've not got the, they're working massive amounts of time. They certainly, you know, let's ignore the fact that they can still be putting in effort with their kids. If you don't have the resources to afford, say, you know, extra reading books, trips to the library, trips to extracurricular stuff, access to sports. You know, I said a gym a minute ago. Gyms have quite expensive membership fees if you're living paycheck to paycheck, right? These are things which are going to be easier for a wealthier family, like the.
No doubt, no doubt. You keep
Exactly,
saying
so
the
then
wound
resources
is
matter
bleeding, and
then.
I'm saying absolutely that's true. But if I were, say, morbidly obese, and I'm complaining to you about how I'm struggling because of all of these things due to my weight, and I said, but you know, I can't afford a gym membership, would you say, oh well, just give up then?
Well, no, of course not. But someone being like,
Could you make some recommendations to someone like me that maybe a gym membership isn't
of course you
required for?
okay. A gym membership costs money, though. So people who are obese, who are poorer, have a harder time losing the weight because they're less able to get out of their, enter new routines and such. Similarly,
You're responding as if I'm disagreeing with you. I've
no, but
agreed
can
to
you see
that.
that?
I've agreed to that premise every single time you've said it.
Yeah.
So my question is, in the real world, now that we deal with the realities on the ground, we agree on all of the platitudes. If things were perfect, if we could make them this better scenario, I would say yes, let's do that. But we live in the world we live in. We recognize that this is not hereditary in the sense of biology necessarily, but it is definitely hereditary in that if my parents didn't care about it, I'm less likely to care about it, finances, education, etc. So like the end outcome that I'm doing my best to good faith your position, and it sounds to me like the best outcome would be if everybody has the exact same resources. And the only way we can do that is the moment a child is born, we take them away from their parents so that everybody can be raised communally, all to the same standards. Now, that sounds ridiculous, and I agree. It's kind of ridiculous, but
I don't think that's I don't think that's quite what I've sort of. I think that's a bit of a logical conclusion from the things I've sort of said. So short term.
How else do we get to the point where everybody has equitable resources in the way you're stating?
Well, the long term, you know, the overarching thing is improving or addressing the fact that we have a capitalist system which doesn't work. In the short term, in the sense of right now, what can we do? With not imposing austerity on schools which are already struggling to get by, as we're seeing from lots of right-wing governments across the Western world. Right?
Please don't just restate the thing that I've agreed to 1,000,000 times.
But I'm not. Okay, I'm not. I keep saying it because it's true, right? Like
no one's disagreeing that it's true. I'm saying, what about what I'm saying?
And what are you saying?
All right.
That's a serious question. I mean, we're coming towards the the end of our thing. I've got some questions in the chat, and we'll let the chat ask some questions in a moment.
Yeah, that's good. Go ahead.
But genuinely, what are you like? If you're not disagreeing with what I'm saying, what are you saying?
I'm saying that the only thing that seems to have worked by example is something like the Mississippi system, where by essentially saying, tough cookies, parent, your child is going to be held back. I don't care what social stigma that you take from that. And I will grant you, they did extend extra money for certain resources, although proportionally to most other states in the country, it's still way, way less money than any of the other states are putting in toward their education system. It seems like that alone, the fear of having your child be held back, is having amazing outcomes. And again, I'm pointing to, this is putting the onus back on the parents.
So, I mean, I don't see how that necessarily contradicts what I've said. That point, which I'm not giving a judgment on yet.
Wait. Do you think the people in Mississippi got richer in the last 4 years compared to all the other states?
No, what I'm saying is holding children back a year. I mean, the way we do education, where we sort of have it, age based, right? You go for this year, from this year, from this year, has, I mean, like, there's elements to it which are socially useful in the sense that you've got people of the same amount of time on the planet, together. So you haven't got like 18-year-old learning with a 10-year-old. But on the flip side, as we said earlier, you've got different abilities within that group and in different areas, which are going to be maybe not going at the speed that it could be. Maybe someone needs more support. And then that leads to the social stigma of holding someone back when they aren't able to meet the certain level for a certain age group.
I totally agree. And I even heard a study to argue to your side, because I do like to be fair to both sides. There's apparently some extremely high correlation between being held back 2 years and not graduating. And I have no problem accepting that. That seems like you could argue a mechanism for that extremely easily. However, even though these are not the students who would have been of the elementary school age where the holding back is occurring under their new system, in those same years, it's not just their lower grades that are coming up in standards. Their graduation rate has also gone up.
This is in Mississippi, you're saying?
Yes, sir. And I'm not saying that's necessarily causal. It's much harder to create some kind of mechanism. But if I'm really stretching, you could think, well, if a parent has a student that's in elementary school, but they also have a student that's later middle school going into high school, the new standards that are being expected of that parent at the elementary school level will bleed across to most of their children.
I mean, for some parents, that might have the effect. But
okay, for some parents, sure. How do we explain Mississippi?
Even in Mississippi, it's going to have some, but we're also
it went from like 48th, 49th in the country to like, I think they're in the top 10 now, as far as elementary
measured by what
testing is going.
In terms of like kids getting
state
through
testing,
right?
Literacy metrics. I don't think anybody cares as much about numeracy metrics as I do, but
that numeracy is important as well.
Well, but that's another thing I'm going to point to. Why is literacy so much more prevalent in our Western societies than numeracy? I would argue it only comes down to the social stigma. Parents want their children to be able to read because they don't want their children to be laughed at and not be able to engage in society. But they don't necessarily see a reason why math is all that important. If there was the same social stigma, I would bet math would be in exactly the same place. And in the information processing area that we're entering, now I'm very biased as a math person, but I would argue that math is almost more important than literacy.
I mean, I don't. Both are connected. Both are important. I don't think it has to be like.
So why have we seen such a different rate? For decades and decades, there has always been a very clear difference. You look at literacy rates, you look at numeracy rates are always lower. Doesn't matter what district you're in.
So, so you asked me why more, maths is lower than literature. Like I, I don't really think that. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. Both are important for different and the same reasons. I think they're both important to focus on. Because
Okay, that wasn't quite my question. I think we both agree they're both important. I'm asking you why the difference.
Say me again.
Why the difference? I'm proposing that the difference comes down to parental engagement and some kind of social stigma. Can you give me any other mechanism by which I should always see literacy performing higher in any district than numeracy?
Well, literacy is something we've had. You grow up with words and such. Number isn't necessarily something that comes straight away, but there's also
well, hang on.
programs which are put in place.
Isn't that coming down to the parents again as well? Don't we have all of these studies that the students who hear 10,000 words by the time they hit fourth or kindergarten have a much broader vocabulary? Okay, so what is that? What can we conclude from that?
We can conclude that if you spend more time with your kid reading before they enter school, it's easier to get them reading beforehand. Whereas I think because we
just sitting down and reading, because I don't think it's just sitting down and reading. I think it's, as children, we're looking up to our parents. If our parents are engaging in this broad vocabulary, we're kind of bootstrapped. I mean, I know you don't like that term, but there we are. We're kind of bootstrapped because we're trying to conform to the environment which is provided to us. So if that environment is demanding a level of excellence, those people tend to be meeting that level at a much higher rate. When it comes to literacy,
none of that contradicts what I've been saying, though, which is that if you put even just this program, if you gave, because like a state like Mississippi, all states really, but especially Mississippi, the funding that a lot of these schools get is still quite dire. It's still subject to the same cuts and such. Like even with programs like this they're still not getting the money and resources to execute them in the best sense.
Then how do we explain the drastic change in their outcomes? Well, I agree with you. If we look state by state and we look at education funding in Mississippi, it is still one of the lowest funded states.
Yeah.
So how did they go from almost 50 to, hopefully I'm not misquoting here, but I'm pretty sure it's top 10.
Or a program of some kind which identifies, educators still exist, right? And they can still do things. But for one, lots of states are not in a good place. So I don't think it's actually
mechanism, please. Mechanism.
I'm getting to it, right? Like it's
okay.
I don't. Lots of states are not the best. I mean, America's got a very underfunded and bad educational system in the sense that lots of schools don't have resources and such, and don't even taking into consideration all the things you've said, they're still not getting resources which would help them. So
is Mississippi getting equitable funding to all the other states? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Your concern is equity.
I would imagine no, because Mississippi's got a different population to the others, and is also operated by people with different ideologies than other states as well. However, and
historically a much lower educated population, right?
And the educators there are still trying to put things in place, like a reading program, which is obviously going to change the way that things are assessed and evaluated and standardized and such. However, firstly, none of that contradicts the fact that if you had more resources for these schools, these educators could help more people and could support the ones who don't get the 10,000 words read to them at whatever point, which also then affects how, if the parents had more resources at their disposal, they also could help their kids to a greater extent. They're not going to they're not going to struggle to help that kid grow in not just literally, but into the maths and science and any subject, because they've got more resources to help them. And then thirdly, even just because you've got a number, ultimately as well, the experience the kid has going through the school is going to be mediated by the resources that school has, not just based on how they do in a test at the end of it. Because the kids that are in these poorer areas, sure, more of them might pass the reading level and such, but there needs to be more than just that as a measure of how education is going. if the school's still facing cuts and setbacks and they're still in underfunded classes and such, that is not going to mean a lot when they enter the world of work and they're in a poorer state. Yeah. So I think that whilst I'm very glad that Mississippi has picked up on where it is, the underlying problems are still there. And the states, because that program as well, that also needed someone to put resources and research together to make it happen. That isn't happening in a lot of places, and other places could do more if they had the impetus. Which
how much more funding did Mississippi allot as a percentage?
I don't know what the exact number is. However, I know that it will not be what that is equivalent to the need that is actually needed in those schools, because it is not enough like anywhere. The US doesn't have the necessary funding allocated, and it's not just US, lots of countries in the West don't allocate enough to education compared to other sectors of society. If we put more money into schools than into things like prisons, policing, tax breaks for corporations and such, we'd have a much better time for more people. I do think, as we are coming up to an hour 40, obviously you can say a bit more if you'd like, but I think there are a few questions in the chat, which, and I'll give you an opportunity for them to ask some more. There was one, where have you gone, Dargesh? This one was, you've already sort of said a little bit, but Dargesh asks, if the parents are barely scraping by and working multiple jobs, how are they supposed to spend more time with their kids?
If I'm overweight and I can't afford the gym, what should I do?
That doesn't really answer their question.
No. It is the answer. I think if you were my friend, and you seem like a very nice person, but I wouldn't necessarily say we're friends. If you were my friend and you saw me suffering in this way, I would hope that you would try to help me come up with some plan that was not as resource demanding, and maybe not the perfect plan, because all things considered, if I could have a 24/7, personal chef and gym trainer, a life coach, if I could have 5 people tending to me, yes, absolutely, my outcomes could be better. But given the situation that such a person might find themselves in, I would hope you'd say something like, well, can you take a walk?
But can you then, based on what you just said there about if you had the life coach and the gym membership and such, it would be easier for the obese person to lose the weight? That demonstrates that if they had more resources.
Do you see how you keep jumping? I'm saying,
or is it?
What can I do given that I do not live in that world? I'm agreeing with you. If we lived in a utopia, things would be better. Yes, you have no disagreement from me there. Do we live in a utopia?
Not currently. So
okay. Would you even want us to live in a utopia?
Well, we should aim for the best we can, right? But
I question that, because at some level,
you question aiming for good stuff. What?
Well, to be a utopia, we would have to get rid of the human condition, and that's somewhat of a dystopia on some
condition. Level. Okay, but surely then,
yes, we would have to get rid of things like greed and wealth hoarding and stealing, and yes,
we can aim to reduce those things, so can't we? We can aim to be better.
Okay.
I mean, no one's saying that it's like,
so
we will reach this date, but we can try.
Given that I can't afford all of the trainers, is your advice to me, well, if we lived in a better world, then you could do something about it?
But obviously, you would try and help and get them to be better and such. But
in what ways?
Also recognize. Sorry.
In what ways? Give me something concrete. Give me something tangible.
For the obese person, or for the these parents in Dargesh's question.
I feel like the obese person is a little bit easier because it's not as socially taboo. I'm the bad guy willing to say that parents are failing their kids, but most people are not willing to say that. So obesity is one of those things that, societally speaking, most people agree that, you should do something about that.
So, I mean, fat phobia is sort of a thing, but obese people.
Well, it's not fat phobic. The person is your friend. And like,
I mean, in the sort,
you
in the
wouldn't be
sense that, like,
friends with a
just,
person if you were fat phobic.
well, I mean, people are, but no, let's focus on the on this one, the obese person. Of course, you would try and put in a plan to change their diet, to think about how they can do more activities in their their day, do more exercise, eat less, do more, eat healthier, etc. Those things, though, when put into practice, aren't as easy as just giving someone a command and having them executed. They're not a computer, they're a person. And so they've fallen into habits which need to be analyzed. Now, a habit that is about exercise, like I go running regularly, for instance. I've had to be running for a while to be able to run the distance and time I do. Someone starting off there is going to have a harder time getting into that routine, especially if their obesity is partly because they've been working in a job that doesn't give them the hours to be able to fit in exercise and fit stuff in. So if your job is something which doesn't have much mobility involved in it, then it's quite a lot. You're one, forming executive tasks with your mind, so that is tiring you out. But for two, it's hard to, you have to then dig time out of your own schedule to try and improve your fitness and such. Now, it's not impossible. You can do it. It's just harder if you don't have those economic advantages other people do. And there's also the health thing as well, like the eating. Sorry, if you don't have the funds to be able to afford fresh groceries, not everyone has access to fresh food. Not everyone has the ease of getting said fresh food. It's easier sometimes, and therefore harder to get out of the habit of eating foods that contain a higher level of salts and sugars and fats and such. So with anything, we have to look at the systemic problems that go into why a person gets to that state. And yes, we want to get them to
I'm your
change, but
like, as the I'll take on the role as your friend in this example. Yes, there are so many systemic problems. We should solve those systemic problems. And until then, I probably just can't do anything because, as you said, I can't afford to eat better, and I can't afford to exercise, and I don't have time to put in any extra work.
yeah.
So I should just give up.
No, we keep trying. We're
Well,
saying that
the
these
problem is
influencing,
systemic. What can I do about that?
obviously we would try. No one's saying give up, but we would identify that the factors that influence this make it harder, and then accordingly try and get things changed so that we'd have programs that make it easier for people to gain access to
Why is it
like
so
food and
hard
such.
to say, bud, get off your butt and go for a walk?
That can't be the extent of our attempts to solve a
No, no,
social
no, no,
problem.
no, no. I'm saying ground floor. Let's start with something, because as you pointed out, they're all about these executive functions, right? And these are not things that we're just going to flip a switch and it's going to change overnight, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So we need to do little things to get into a snowballing pattern of habits, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So is my one walk today going to solve my problems?
Gonna help. It's not gonna
That's
solve all of
exactly
them,
right. It's going to help.
but
It's a
yes, but as
start.
well
And
as
because we
helping.
are low time preference, we recognize that that one walk isn't the end all be all. You need to also go for a walk tomorrow and the day after that. And as you hopefully start to trim down a little bit because you're actually doing something now, maybe you can take it to a jog at some point in the distant future.
Yes, but
All right.
all of
So when I
that
hear a
takes.
parent has no time, then I ask, you don't have 5 minutes to care about your
But
child's education?
this is harder for people who don't have as much time. Like, surely you can see that. That's why we're saying it has to be a more. That's why we're saying the resources would help, because you'd be able to enable more time to go to these people who are in these tricky situations. The obese person didn't, you can tell them to, take some time to go for a walk and such. It's not going to have much of an effect if they haven't got the time. So you put things in place in society to make it so that people aren't having to work colossal amounts of time and have their money drained away on rent and food and such. And then it's easier for them to solve problems like helping their kids with homework, or the obese person, losing some of their weight. And therefore, we also engender a more caring and more pleasant society as well, right? Which has a bit more care and mediates some of the problems just through people looking out for each other a little bit more as well, right? All of the things are connected, and all of them go into improving our society.
If we were all better people, we would live in a better world. I agree.
And to make a better world, we've got to improve the
We have
conditions we
to
live in.
examine what incentives are in place that keep people making the same choices over and over. I agree.
I'm trying to find another. There's another question here somewhere. Where? So I saw another one. Chat was sort of scrolling a little bit. I hope you're all enjoying the conversation, all of you. That's the same question again from Dargesh.
I haven't been following the chat.
It's alongside our. It's on the YouTube video, but obviously I'm looking more at this.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily want to get one guide. So, are you giving me a major blowout? Is that the consensus of your chat?
So I think they're just talking about the things you're saying. So a target's going to have one. Look, if a person if a person works 60 hours a week and sleeps 8 hours a day, can this math teacher, American, explain how much time that parent would have free each day? I'll do some quick maths now. What's your answer?
I got to be honest. I didn't know that this was turning into an arithmetic question, so I wasn't paying attention to the numbers. Do you want to run that by me again?
They work 60 hours a week. They sleep 8 hours a day. How much time would that parent have free each day?
Rounding figure, there's 25 hours in a day, so like 100 hours in 4 days minus 4 hours, so 96 hours in 4 days. We're doing 60, and another 8 hours a day.
Yep.
For sleep. By the way, who sleeps 8 hours?
The healthy adult, hopefully.
So figure another 10 by 7. So that's going to require another 3 days.
Got my answer, by the way.
Okay, give it to me.
52 hours. 24 times 7 is 168. 8 hours a day in a week is 56. So that is 108 minus 56, which is 168. Oh, what we've done actually? Hold on a second.
So about 2 days spare is what we're saying.
Right, I might have miscalculated this. 168 hours in a week. Take away 60 is 108. Take away 56 is 52. 52 hours in a week divided by 7 is about 7 and a bit hours a day free. Before you take away eating, drinking, getting to and from work and such. All the other things that take up the day. Now, this time is there and absolutely could go into helping their kid along with all the other stuff. But it's harder and you have less of it if you're working this much than someone who doesn't have to work 60 hours a week. And especially if that said person is earning more and can put time into other things for their children to do, so extracurricular activities, access to resources and sports and such. Therefore, we can conclude that it's easier for people with more resources, which therefore makes it important to try and make this more equitable across education networks and systems. Hello? I haven't disconnected, has it? Oh.
I'm sorry, I think I got disconnected. Now am I here twice?
Yeah, indeed you are. There's two of you now. You outnumbered me. I mean, we're coming up to 2 hours, so we might slowly work towards our conclusion. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to answer the questions, but it just keeps forcing us to derail back to you telling me what I've agreed with.
I wouldn't say quite derailing, but maybe it's going back to it because it all connects back to that point. No? I'm sure there was another question somewhere. And no, your chat wasn't silly, Queendom. How did the US go so wrong?
For the record, this is one of those new math things. Arithmetic is not valued as highly because the patterns are really where the subject is evolving to. So, am I bad at arithmetic? Yes. Can I do calculus? Also, yes.
Well, it's I'm sure like trends in academics are they're for reasons. Like it's not like people trying to come up with solutions have a hard time because of the aforementioned stuff we've said, right? But
yeah, there's a very good reason. Like one of the things that parents argue about, you've heard the whole new math fiasco, right? I don't know if that's gotten across the pond.
But refresh my mind.
I can't be super specific. It's just that the focus is less about rote learning, like the mechanics of how to do long division, and more about the pattern of what division is. Or as a really good example, one thing that frustrates parents a lot is they'll be doing what you and I might call simple addition problems, like 3-digit additions or something like that. And they force the students to break the digits out into the 1 spot, the 10 spot.
Okay, so like if it was like 123 plus 119, you're doing like 100 plus 120 plus, like breaking it all down into parts and such.
Yeah. Do you know why they're focusing on that as opposed to the actual computation?
Why they're focusing on that, Chapingro?
You're a smart guy. You know that all of our computing systems, it's not a demand. It's just the way things are today. That 99.9% of our computing systems run on a binary set. You're aware of that, right?
Yep.
Do you know how binary differentiates from decimal?
Zeros and ones, right? Versus base 10.
Okay. And how are they the same?
In a sense. In what sense? Like in the sense they both use numbers? In the sense that they both represent a value? Like
Can we do addition in binary?
Yes, but not in the same sense, right? Like you couldn't do like a. Well, actually, no, you can. You can do addition in binary.
Yeah, that's why the new math is important here, because instead of in decimal, where we have the 10 to the 0 spot or the 1 spot, the 10 to the first spot, the 10 to the second spot, the 10 to the third spot, in binary, the digits extend out in the same way, but the multiplier is a power of 2 instead of a power of 10. So you have the 1 spot, you have the 2 spot, the 4 spot, the 8 spot, the 16 spot.
Yeah.
Now, once you see the grander pattern, everything works exactly the same. A carry, like you would do in decimal, is exactly the same way that a carry works in binary, with the one exception that we carry once we hit 2 instead of hitting 10.
Right. But I don't see quite how this is like if they're breaking down numbers and such in a different way. Like they're still trying to get to the same solutions. I'm not seeing how it's quite as.
The link here is that, well, you might not agree. I've had some curmudgeons that I've argued with, but I would argue that we are going toward an era of computing in which, say, if you wanted to be a mechanic, you'd need to know how the engine in your car works. If you want to do anything in today's world, you should probably know, at least on some level, how a computer works. So,
well, then, firstly, I mean, so let me just share my screen quickly. I don't know if we can all see. I've got MS Paint open. If we're doing something like 120, excuse my poor writing.
Now with a mouse, it's impossible.
367, right?
All right.
So I'm going to work it out quickly. We've got 1 there, we've got 9 there, and we've got 4 here. So 491, right? That is one way of doing it. they might also break it down for kids who maybe can't necessarily see it straight away as, so I've got 147, 107 there. You've got 100 plus 300. You've got 20 plus 60. You've got 4 plus 7. And then it gives you 400. It gives you 80. It gives you 11. And then you could even break that down to 10 to 1. And so just breaking it down so it's all together, at the end, right? So some kids aren't necessarily going to see it like this straight away, and so they go for that. Now, they still eventually get to this. It's a very bad circle. They still eventually get to this method. Into this method. But not everyone sees that straight away. So I imagine the reason we might break it down a little bit is just so that they've got that extra step there. I don't think it's like changing what is fundamentally going on. It's just an extra step. Now, when that gets to homework and some parents receive a sheet that makes them do it like this, now, I remember being frustrated in some classes that I couldn't just go straight to this method, but not everyone's at that level. Again, the classes where this is going on have the need that you described earlier, where there's kids who can't even look at a number like 100 and see it as 100. They see it as like 100. They can't see it as anything more than just 3 separate numbers. So of course they want to try and break it down. And they have like place value charts and such. And then eventually, once that step is in place, they get to here. Now, that's another terrible arrow. Now, if
to be fair, the parental complaints is that they would have gone straight to the thing you circled, right? They wouldn't have done the breaking it out part. So the parents say, why are we doing all this extra work if the whole goal is just to be able to add numbers? Like, their frustration is not coming from a completely ridiculous place.
So you're saying parents are, in your experience, parents are upset with the left-hand method?
Yes, sir. So for instance, if you have a little bit of white space there, write down these digits 1011.
Hold on a minute, let me just 1011. All
right. Now, if I gave you this number and said it's in binary.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. It's a test me, isn't it? Right. So what we've got?
No. I don't want to test you. I need to know the extent of where you are. I definitely don't want to put a gotcha because I'm trying to claim this is what we should be doing. Not that I think less of you. So
it's 11, right?
3 plus 8, yeah.
Yeah, I was getting worried then. I was saying, put me in the spot.
So look at what you just did. You did exactly the same breakdown that was on the left-hand side previously. You said I have 1 8, and I have 0 4s, and 1 2, and 1 1, and then probably you switch back to decimal in your head because that's what we all do. You said, all right, 8 plus 2 is 10, plus 1, and that's 11. All right, it's 11.
Yeah.
But the thing that you have written on the left-hand side of the equal sign is written in decimal. The thing that you have written on the, I'm sorry, did I say that wrong? The thing you have on the right-hand side is in decimal. The thing you have on the left-hand side is in binary. But the pattern is the same for both. There's a meta pattern here in which the digits are just powers of some base.
Yeah.
So most people don't engage with binary, even today, until like college. Now that the new math is coming into play, I can introduce binary, really, if I wanted to, what, like 4th grade level?
Yeah. So what's the, so new math, so you're saying with new maths, this is introduced earlier?
I'm saying it exactly what you were pointing toward. It gives us the resources to be able to engage with it much sooner. It gives us the mental patterns to cognitively deal with this. Even though they look different, we can squint our eyes and say, oh, well, the same thing is going on.
So what's the issue then? I mean, ultimately, or where's the concern, sorry?
I'm not necessarily stating a concern. I was pointing back to, this is one of those places where, regardless of wealth category, any parent that comes to me and says, this is a waste of time, why can't we just do the addition the rote way that I was taught back in the day? I'm saying, you're not looking ahead to your child's future enough. If you took the time, parent, to understand what you were taught to do back in the day, if you actually understood the math you were doing, then you would be totally okay with this.
But for a parent to understand this, they need to have had the time spent learning it, which needs resources to have happen, right? Like, sure, I know I'm saying it again, but it's fundamentally true. Like, the reason we both understand this is in part because we were taught it. Like, we people in our lives helped us learn this.
I'm saying this is a learned helplessness that I see not only in low socioeconomic areas, I also see it from the wealthy parents.
Okay, but we learned this because we were taught math in your case, right?
No, I like maths, by the way. I think you guys are actually correct about that one. I've thought about it a long time. I've switched sides. There are many maths.
But like, we like, because my dad like really loves maths as well. So that is already an advantage for me, because it means that I've got that extra resource for myself, but also I can just bring, when I was a kid, I could bring him stuff and we'd do it together and he could point me in the right direction. And now, if
you skipped over the key part. The key part there was that he's interested.
Yeah, because because I was lucky. We had the time and resources. That doesn't mean that it is. It inherently means I have the best ever, and other people need to be better. It means that the resources from my family compared to others and the time and such meant that it was easier. And yeah, of course, I'm not. Like I said earlier, we weren't like mega wealthy or anything. But at the same time, there's some families that would never have had the time to sit and do maths with me. There's some parents that had a harder time in school than my parents did, and therefore wouldn't have been in a position to say, yeah, come on kids, let's come and do this work. Some of it is just insecurity about their own ability, so they're not able to help with stuff. They believe that the school will have to solve it because they can't engage in it, and they can't have the time to engage in it either. Like, there's so much more than just the parents. And I think that we're well over 2 hours now, but like, surely, whilst of course we want people, we're both on the same page, we both want parents being able to help their kids, but to facilitate a world where parents are more easily able to help the kids, we've got to have the resources put into their communities, which is their schools, libraries, transport, better cost of living and such. And as has been hinted at a few times by myself and definitely set out right in the chat, that's got to come from looking at and critiquing capitalism you can say. And I will finish with this awesome joke.
I don't necessarily want to go down that rabbit hole. There's a bunch of disagreement. We've been going into it for a while.
Indeed. We'll end on this fantastic joke by Dargash.
All right.
Which you can read there. There are 10 types of people: those who understand binary and those who don't. A classic, no?
And you read it wrong.
I did read it wrong, yeah. I failed the test. But no, we'll finish on that bombshell.
Hey, well, I appreciate you. We went back and forth a lot, and obviously we disagreed, but you're very kind-spirited guy, and it's been a lot of fun.
I'm very glad, man. Well, it was nice talking to you as well. We disagree, but there is, like I said earlier, like, you speak to some people that have a very horrible disposition towards education. So, there is some, I think, shared element of wanting things to be better. Just wish we could see, well, you don't even necessarily disagree, but resources would help. You just sort of, it's different location for it and such.
I'm biting my tongue hard, man. If you keep talking, I'm going to want to jump back in. So however you want to.
No, we'll wrap up with what do I say? I'm streaming someone tomorrow. Thank you everyone for listening, And
thank you, chat.
everyone be well.
Hope you had a good time.
Until-
And thank you, Owen.